Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Erudition Network. Welcome to the Erudition Network Interactive Black History and Knowledge Session. We are a little bit early today. I wanted to do this session and to do it a little early, started around 4 o'clock, and give you guys about 2 hours today. There's a reason why I'm doing this, but we're going to get into it, and we're going to really make this session interactive. We're going to cover a lot of information. And so if you are one of the people who do not watch this live, I would ask you that when you do watch it, because I know the information that is going to be put out today is important, I would ask that when you do watch it, that you share. And if you haven't already, I'd ask that you go to our YouTube channel, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that we can see your comments. As Facebook is doing the different things that it's doing to, I would say, hinder or definitely not make it easy to do shows like this, I want you to be able to interact and talk to us and interact with us on these programs as we go. My wife is on here. Yes, early. We're on here early, and there's a reason. There's so much going on. So much information, misinformation that is being put out here. We always see some misinformation, but lately it has gotten to such a point where it's just ridiculous. You don't know what you can trust. If you're not prayed, read, and studied, you're going to be possibly lost, because so much has been put out here to dissuade you and to push you into a position where you don't trust even the facts that are being presented to you. And some of the things that we're going to talk about in this session, and I'm going over this because I don't know, many of you may watch this for the first time. This might be the first time that you actually watch the interactive. So I want you to understand what we do here on Thursdays. I usually, and I still am going to do it today, open up the floor for questions for people who want to ask questions about history, seek information, and things like that. But today, I am really going to kind of go deep. I'm going to pre-warn you. We're going to go a little deep today. And the reason being is because again, like I said, we got to get this information out here. I was stalling a little bit because I wanted to just allow people to get in here so they had time to kind of join us. Usually give that first 5 or 6 minutes so that those who may have, sometimes that stuff is delayed, who may have pushed the button to be notified, rather be on Facebook or YouTube, give them time to join us. So that is one of the reasons why I'm kind of stalling a little bit. Pastor Sargent, good to see you. Good to see you. Hey, I hope you can stick around tonight. This is going to be a really, really, really good session. It's going to go into a lot of things, and I really want everyone's interaction. I want you all to interact, and I want you to ask questions and to challenge even me on the things that, you know, I go out of my way to make sure that I present you facts, but I want you to challenge as we go forward. All right, I'm gonna give it about another 2 minutes, and then we're gonna get started because we're gonna be on here for about 2 hours today, and I don't want to come short, even though we're giving all of that time. I don't know if you all know this, but Thursday nights that I do this, and I'm telling you this, so you know, people say, "Well, I'll be tired." I'm tired too. Thursday nights, I do this show, and then I go to work later on in the evening. So I work nights during the weekend. So the issue is that if I'm working nights during the weekends and I'm giving my time, it's about prioritizing your history, prioritizing those things that are important. Very often people see that we're on live and they don't prioritize the information that we're putting out. And sometimes I'm telling you all tonight, some of the stuff we're getting ready to go into, you need this information. You need it because we're living in a dangerous time, and we're prayerful and we're seeking God, and we know that God can change things. But I'm going to tell you at the same time, God does not want us to be ignorant. And we are seeing foolery at epic proportions right now. Foolery at epic proportions. People saying that they're studying, people saying that they're researching, people saying that they know what they're doing. And in reality, don't really know how to do some of the things that they're proclaiming that they're doing. And so we're going to kind of hit that stuff tonight. All right. Those are a couple minutes that I gave. I gave minutes. I gave some time. Let's get into this. So tonight, I put out a little pre-announcement. I don't typically do that, but I'm starting to do that now, coming up here, especially for the interactives, because I believe that we need to know what it is that we're looking at and what it is that we're going to talk about. First, be fair. I'm going to open up the floor. Tonight, though, I'm going to open up the floor for about 5 minutes. I'm going to ask you guys if you have any questions, history questions, concerns, issues, things that you want answered, that you think that you just want to discuss. This is your time. If you have a Black history question, or any question that we could discuss right now, I'm going to open this up for the next 5 minutes for you to be able to do that. If you don't have any questions, just type in the chat and say, "Hey, no questions," and we will keep it moving. But I always try to open up this program and allow people to ask questions and to inquire about what's going on. So this is your time to do that. And that's a great time, too, because it gives me some time right now to get on here, and I'm trying to send out this reminder to some people. So, hey, I'm here, and I'm open for your questions. Any questions, anything that you want to ask. All right, we see anything here? Anything? Anybody got anything? I said, if you don't have no questions, just type up in there, or you could just put in queue, and that's fine. You said maybe we'll have questions once I start the topic. Oh, I'm sure you will, but I'm asking you for your personal questions. Any questions that you might have? No questions. Thank you, Pastor Sergeant. All right. If there's no questions, let's get into this then. Let me send this out. I keep trying to do this. I had it set up, and then what happened was I clicked off. So I'm doing this. This is one of the reasons why I try to do this at the desktop. I'm trying to change that up coming up here soon, but I try to do it at the desktop because if something goes wrong, at least I'm right there to fix it. But sometimes, when you do these types of programs, It's just what it is, ladies and gentlemen. It's kind of uh, so you run into all of these different problems and issues. But all right, I just sent that out for people. If they don't know, now they know to join us for this live session. Now, let me ask you all a question. How many of you all have been watching the issues going on right now in the public? We got the election, of course, ramping up. But how many of you have heard about this 2025 project? How many people have heard about it, don't really know what it is, or you think you know some of it because of what the media has shared? Give me your thoughts on what you think you know, or what, or if you don't know anything, like I said again, just type it in the chat and say, "Hey, don't know anything about it." And I'll give you guys a moment for that. All right. Nothing. All right. Well, let me tell you all something. I was sitting down and I was trying to bring up the graphic that I had for there it is, for this program. I'm gonna share that on my screen here so we can kind of understand what it is we're talking about tonight. I put some top fives up here. I don't typically do that, but I put some top fives on here. And so I want you all to see this. There we go. Come on, share. All right. So tonight, these are some of the things we're going to talk about. This is some of the things we're going to talk about. There is a thing that I want us to correlate tonight. Many people, I asked my sons the other day and my wife, they were all downstairs, and I asked them about the Weimar Republic. Does anybody remember hearing about the Weimar Republic in school? Of course, my oldest says he remembers the name, but he couldn't correlate the idea of it. But the Weimar Republic came about after World War I. It was what happened when the Germans were basically made the scapegoat for World War I. And after World War I, the Weimar Republic was a liberal government that came in and removed the so-called emperor or king of Germany, and the republic was put into place to allow to have a national assembly, to have a government, because, as I said, Kaiser Wilhelm II had abdicated his role and he had left. So this was a period between 1919 and 1933. The Weimar Republic is very important because when we look at a governmental body, when we look at the idea of, okay, what do you say here? I don't like to dig too far into the 2025 because I don't like anything I've read thus far. So I'm not trying to keep reading it all. And you don't have to. You don't have to. Just follow me here tonight. We're going to make a comparison here. We're going to talk about the Weimar Republic. And we're going to hit it from many different sides. And to allow to help with that, I used a new program called Mapify. And I really support this program because it allows me to go in and I break down my writings and the things that and the notes that I have and construct it in a way that people could be able to see what went on, right? So the first thing I want us to look at, and I'm bringing it up right now. The first thing I want us to look at is I want us to look at a timeline, a historical timeline. And of course, this thing wants to act crazy with me because it's mad that I'm doing this. But we're going to do it regardless, even if it is mad, because it's something that we need to know. All right. So we're going to do this timeline here. And let me see. I'm going to try to make it to 80. All right. And I'm going to share my screen again with you all. Please bear with me because the computer, it doesn't always like me sharing all these screens, but we're going to do that tonight because this is what we have to do in order for us to really get a grasp on this. All right, here we are. So the Weimar Republic is important because we don't like to talk about and compare people to Hitler, but we really have to understand what was the motivations and the things that Hitler was able to do. And in order to do that, we have to look at how he came to power. The collapse of the Weimar Republic is important because it changed the entire world. We would not have had World War II without the collapse of the Weimar Republic. So how did Hitler do it? He went in and history would tell us that he just became chancellor and then he forced himself to be a dictator. But that is not really how it happened. Hitler, and there is some correlation here, was a criminal, right? He was a convicted criminal. He tried to overthrow the republic first by force, put out a lot of rhetoric, fought in the streets, had his Nazis and neo-Nazis out here fighting and beating up Jewish people, other political groups, and they were fighting and killing in the streets of Germany after World War I. And what wound up happening is that Hitler wound up going to jail. He was locked up. And while he was locked up, he wrote his famous book, Mein Kampf, Mein Struggle. He wrote this book. And while he was put in jail. But an interesting, let me also tell you, Hitler used his ability to connect with the disenfranchised, with the farmers and the people who are on the outskirts of Germany, the folks who are being hit hard by economic issues. And his Nazis engendered themselves to those people so that they could gain support. When he was on trial for trying to overthrow the government by force, he made this huge speech in court, and the judge who was actually giving him his time reduced his sentence. People had died during this push. People were killed, but they reduced his time. So he got out and he realized, this from his own words, that what he needed to do is what we see was the first step here. He needed to do what was called political maneuvering. So you can't just change something by force. You can't just attack people. So what he did was he utilized the instability of the Weimar Republic, which was a new system. Right? He talked, as I said, to the people on the outskirts about the economic crisis and their political things and how things were going wrong for them. Right? He used propaganda with Joseph Goebbels to tell people that they would be better off under a system that he proposed. It became such a popular thing that he ran for office against the president, the Weimar president of Germany. He lost because the Nazis did not have enough power. I will tell you that the Nazis, even when they came into power, they only came into power with 30% of the government. They didn't have 50%. But what they had was the people. They had a significant amount of people that allowed Hitler to be appointed as chancellor. because Hitler realized, I cannot fight physically. Let me get in and do something politically. He persuaded the then President Van Hindenburg to appoint him as chancellor and to appoint another man as co-chancellor. History very rarely remembers the other man who was appointed as co-chancellor, because Hitler basically had a plan. Now, the other political thing that was done, and history can't, some historians say they did or they didn't, is they burnt down the Reichstag. That would be the equivalent of burning down the United States Capitol. There was a fire in the Reichstag in 1933. Hitler used that fire to justify his ability to take on emergency powers, because he was already chancellor with an aging president. They wrote what is known in history as the Reichstag Fire Decree. And this suspended civil liberties and allowed him to use his thugs to arrest people, what we would look at as our police and our soldiers. He took power legally. And as we look through what we see here on this chart, the legal reforms, right? His Enabling Act, which allowed Hitler to enact laws against parliamentary consent. In other words, to remove what we would look at as our Congress. Suppression of opposition. He got rid of his political rivals. He got rid of his co-chancellor. He built roads. He gave breaks to people who were in his favor so that he could gain popular support. He started to rearm his military, which was something that was against the Treaty of Versailles, which had been ended World War I. And the rest, the militarization and the paramilitary military forces, that's all what we know of World War II, got us into World War II. But what we never look at is how he did it. He engendered himself to those who would actually vote against their best interests. He took rights from people, and they thought they were better without having these rights. He did all of that, and he did it legally. And when you look at the timeline in which he did it, he didn't take very long to do it. So by the time he marches into Poland, by the time he wages war, he's already gotten everything he wanted as a dictator out of his own country. He's already started to kill Jewish people. He's already started to kill German citizens. He even turned on his own original paramilitary force and killed them in the Night of Long Knives. I talked to you all about that 2 weeks ago. Now you say, Eddie, well, why do we care? Why do we care about Hitler? Why do we think that that is important? Ladies and gentlemen, I have had people tell me within the last few days, I've had people tell me that it's not important who is president, that it's not important how our government is set up. I've heard people and pundits sit on television recently and say it's not important. Well, I'm going to tell you tonight it's very important, because Hitler didn't take Germany by force. He preyed on the weakness and the frailty of people. That's what he did. And we're at a point right now, right, that we're seeing almost the same thing happen here. Hitler gave them technology, innovation during the time of the 30s, late 30s, when America was still being ravaged by the Depression. Germany was actually doing better. when they had suffered from inflation before. Inflation so bad that when you went to the store one day, the next day the price had doubled or tripled. So the people were prone to listen to anything. And those who did not trust the Nazis said, well, it doesn't involve me. There were Jewish people who said, well, at least we know how he feels about us, so we know what to do if it gets bad. But they did not escape. And you ask yourself, well, why is it important to know this history? It is extremely important. It is extremely important because what we're going through right now, we're seeing it again, in my humble opinion. And I'm going to show you tonight why I say that. I want you to consider some of the things that I just presented to you. I want you to consider some of the things that I just showed you as we now look at parts of Trump's Project 2025. I want you to consider what it is that I just told you. Sorry. So I'm going to zoom in a little. All right, here we go. And I hope you guys can see it because I really want you to kind of follow me tonight. So let's look at that idea of what we talked about earlier. Earlier, we talked about how he went in and he reconstructed the government, streamlining things, using politics. Project 2025 says that we're going to go in and streamline consolidating federal agencies, reduce bureaucratic. This is all the things that they say, right? But really what we're talking about here is removing jobs and obstacles that are in place to protect your civil liberties. When we look back at what we talked about with Hitler, we talked about how they went in and did all of those things too, right? They went and told the people out there in the farms and in the woods in the background of Germany, those who were really, really poor. Sorry about that. Those who were really, really poor, they went out there and told them, hey, you know what? We're going to help you. This thing keeps popping up on me. And this is what we're seeing right now. This is what we're seeing right now. We have a bigger government than, say, the Weimar Republic. Our government is huge, right? But at the same time, we can see how they're deregulating. We can see how they're reforming. You can see how they're changing things. This is what we're looking at. This is Project 2025. Changing things and making it seem that it's just normal policy while stripping you of your rights, giving police freedoms just like the SA and the SS to come into your home, to lock you up and have legal immunity to do it. Modernizing and weaponizing the country on a cyber basis and on a military basis to track and look. This is not made up. This is what is in the document. earlier in the other graph, we show Hitler went in and he had the Hitler Youth, right? He taught them what they wanted them to know, to make them good citizens, good followers. Same thing. All of this looks great in the way that we form the words and the way we say the words. But when we say emphasize the patriotic education and school curricula, that's just the same thing as the Hitler Youth. You are owned by the fatherland. And you pledge your allegiance to their leader. We're going to burn books. There's certain things we don't want you to read. So when we say revising standards of education content, what are we saying? We don't have to worry about student loan debt if you're not going to college, because we're going to shut that down. Only certain people are going to be allowed to be promoted through certain things, and other people are going to be pushed down to do basic menial things. And who decides that? We're going to remove the restrictions and the captures that allow you to have health care. The Germans were huge with euthanasia. They were good at about taking out the elderly and the disabled and basically putting them down. During World War II, as Germany fell, they walked into hospitals and sprayed people with bullets in their sick beds. This is a historical fact. And all of this, right, can be done because we simply vote someone into office. The Supreme Court just told us that when a president does something in the office of the president, it's not illegal. They opened up the door. And scholars have been arguing about it. They've said they want to put their judges in the office. The Germans had puppet courts that convicted people that the Nazis didn't like or that they wanted to make an example of. These are facts. So when we sit down and we hear people say, right, that they don't understand. I don't know why this thing is doing this. I'm sorry. They don't understand. I thought you all were looking at my map, but it was cutting out on me. But they don't understand how important it is that we protect ourselves against these things. When you don't think that the office of president has any effect on you, I would tell you, don't think like that. It takes nothing but you to not pay attention, They have a huge plan. And all it takes, as we saw with the Weimar Republic, all it takes is for you to vote them in. It's for you to put them in there. And before you know it, you're going to be, me and you and anyone else is going to be lost. Those things are so similar. As you graft out what is being done, social and cultural control, militarization, social control, establish of stringent things over the newspapers, propaganda campaigns glorifying who they are, education and youth organizations. We're not looking at Project 2025 anymore. We've gotten right back to looking at how Hitler took power, using the Gestapo and the SS or the police and the military to instill fear and suppress potential dissent, giving them immunity for anything that they did. And intellectuals, religious people, clergy, artists, anything seen as a threat was removed. Removed. This is what we're seeing. And it's one of the first things I wanted to talk about tonight. And I know that it is, for many people, they say, oh, it's political. It's not just political, it's historical. It's historical. And we're repeating it. We're repeating it because we don't want to accept the fact, right, that this is real. This is where we are right now in the world. If you go back and you look at the narratives of the people who lived through Nazi Germany, many of them will tell you, Jewish survivors and Germans will say, I didn't think it was going to get that bad. And it happened just that quickly. Because we took our eyes off the ball, because we thought, oh, it's really not that serious. Thoughts, concerns. You guys are kind of quiet out there. If you got any thoughts or concerns, opines, anything that maybe you just disagree with what I just told you. Right? But the truth is, this is what's going on. This is what's going on. And if we're not vigilant, if we're not honest, if we don't say, right, what's going on, we can fall into this. We can fall into this. So now I'm going to present you with a mind shared this idea of both things comparing. And it's funny because the program, when it tries to compare it, because I asked it to compare it, it tries to say certain things. Well, it's not really just that way. One of the things I find funny in this comparison is when it says that, well, they don't have police authority. But that's a part of what it is that they want. And then there's the lie that there's no violence. It said, well, Hitler's wanted to have, he used violence and political pressure. We saw that during January 6th. Violence and political pressure both work when applied together. And the social and political pressures of what we're dealing with right now are more, and what they dealt with are more close than we would like to believe. But one of the key things that is said right here, it says both Hitler and advocates of Project 2025 seek to use legal means to achieve broader, often more radical political objectives. That's what this is about. And a common theme is the centralization of power, rather through legislative changes like the Enabling Act or administrative reforms proposed in Project 2025. If we do not understand how close we are to repeating a situation that almost destroyed this planet and us, our ancestors. So I find it reprehensible that we convince ourselves that it's not that serious. Oh, that's just a madman, an old man. That's somebody. None of this stuff is that serious. Tell that to the millions of people who suffered and died as a result of World War II, as this man came to power. Had they not allowed him to do what he did by political and violent manipulations, we wouldn't have had an Adolf Hitler. But we tell ourselves that the leaders that we have is not important. It's not important. We have people telling folks to not pass laws because it's going to hurt them getting into office. How is that different than political maneuvering and using your alliances to allow yourself to gain power? That's one of the subjects I wanted to talk about tonight, because I felt that we have allowed ourselves to be lulled to sleep. People died. African Americans, I know we hear this a lot. They died not just for your right to vote. They died for your choice. They died so that even if you desire not to vote, that's your choice. That's your prerogative. I was telling my wife and my kids about how when I see people attacking the idea of voting, the first person that comes to my mind is Medgar Evers. Medgar Evers was a veteran. Medgar Evers was a father. Medgar Evers was a Christian. He was a strong Christian man. And Medgar Evers believed that for a country that he had fought and bled for, that his people, his culture, they should have the right to vote. And he flew all over this country to try to ensure that people had that right to vote. But when you ask many young people right now who Medgar Evers is, they don't know. They couldn't spot him if you gave them a picture. They don't know. But in 1963, in Jackson, Mississippi, Medgar Evers, right, who was a field secretary for the NAACP, who was going out there doing nothing more than to get Black people in Mississippi the right to have a choice, got out of his car, was walking into his home, and was shot in the back like a dog. And he had to crawl, bleeding to death, to his front door, and his wife and children had to come and try to administer some aid to him. There are people who gave their lives, ladies and gentlemen, sacrificed their lives and a time with their families that I'm sure that they would have liked to have. But that didn't stop people from being killed. That didn't stop them from putting a bullet in a man like Medgar Evers. And it took years, decades, for his killer to be brought to justice. The man, Byron Della Beckworth, bragged for years about how he shot Medgar Evers to stop those N-words from voting. We better know our history. We better know who we are and what we've given up. I tell you this not to be salacious and to be hyperbolic. I tell you this because that's our history. Go look up Medgar Evers. Go look up Vernon Dahmer and what happened to Vernon Dahmer, another man who simply, right, wanted people to be able to vote. Vernon Dahmer was another one, a father, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, killed by Ku Klux Klan members simply because he wanted to register people to vote. Vernon Dahmer's family was attacked in the middle of the night. House was set on fire, and Vernon Dahmer stayed in that house shooting at the Klan members as he told his family to go run into the woods while he kept them occupied. And he burned in that fire. 80 to 90% of his body being burned. And he didn't die immediately, simply because he wanted us to have a choice. These are serious things. These are things that we have to understand about our history. These are the people who we should know. These weren't celebrities. These weren't folks that are out here that you see dancing around the stage. These was regular people who simply wanted better for those who were going to come after them. One of the things I wanted to talk about tonight, and it's a painful thing, is I wanted to talk about, because we got into this with Eric when he was on here 2 weeks ago. And there was an issue that was brought up about presidential failures. It's one of the top 5 I want to talk about tonight too. Presidential failure is a huge thing because here's the reality of it. If we don't understand that the office of the president dictates the policies just as much as Congress, that has and will affect minorities and people of color. I went through a chart. I made a chart, and I asked Mapify to go in and take my chart, right, and break it down. And I wanted to show racial failures. I had told Eric 2 weeks ago to go get the book by Bill O'Farry Hutchison, Presidential Failures. I told him to go get that book because I thought it was important that he understood that this was not something that was random, and that this had happened for many a decade since the very beginning of this country. Since the very beginning of this country. And ladies and gentlemen, it just comes down to the fact that we don't seem to understand. We don't seem to understand that it is so important who we put into these offices. But at the same time, we got to understand that except for one, every president that we've had really didn't have any skin in the game. They had no skin in the game because it was they are not black. They're not minority. They saw themselves that they were above all of that. And so when we see this, we have to say to ourselves, why do we have these failures? Well, I tried to tell him to go look at that, but I sat down with Mapify again, and I went through this, and we're going to hit this too. And I hope you all are getting something from this program tonight. I sat there and I thought long and hard. I said, man, I told my family, I'm going to do 2 hours. 2 hours is hard, but it is so important that we go over this information. It is so important that it is put out here. Let's look at the early presidents, or what we like to call the founding fathers, and those who helped to start this country, right? Those guys and what they brought to the table, right? George Washington's failure. He owned slaves. And regardless of what you say about Washington, regardless of how you feel, and people lie, and I hear folks sit here and talk about how we should go back to 1776. The truth of the matter is his failure was he endorsed slavery. He endorsed slavery to the day he died. There was no desire to alleviate slavery, to stop slavery. That was his failure. Even though the Declaration of Independence said all men, but if you don't consider people to be men or women, let's get to John Adams. Historians will tell you that John Adams was not a racist. He was not an advocate of slavery, but he didn't do anything to stop it. As a matter of fact, if you read many of his papers, he talks about the enfeebleness, the ignorance that he saw in people of color. He was a proponent of white supremacy, but maybe not slavery, because my religious aversion to it tells me that we shouldn't do that. But then again, we shouldn't allow them to live amongst us either. Thomas Jefferson. I didn't really want to cover Thomas Jefferson. He's one of the few people that we even talk about, and we know that he had slaves, that he slept with his slaves, that he had slave children. We know that. But one of the things that is not often talked about is that through the Louisiana Purchase, he expanded slavery beyond the 13 colonies. He allowed slavery to grow. This man who wrote the Declaration of Independence, James Madison. People often tell me, right, that James Madison was this great dude and all of this, right? James Madison was another one who cared little about Black people, slaves. He cared little about it. He is one of the people who drafted the Constitution of the United States. He is one of the major drafters of it. And he did not believe that Blacks, slaves, or whatever were men. And so he allowed them to stay slaves. Same could be said of James Monroe, the author of the Monroe Doctrine. God told us we should rule this land and take it from the savage. God told us that this is the way it's supposed to be. And even when he wanted to get rid of Blacks for a while, until he realized that's our labor. No, we can't get rid of our horses. We can't get rid of our slaves any more than we get rid of our horses. John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, who later railed against the idea of slavery after he was president. But during his presidency, he talked badly about black slaves, Mexicans, and talked about how we are enfeebled in mind and not as smart and a danger to ourselves. So you have to hold him to his limited racial advocacy. See, these are not the things that you're told about these folks, our founding fathers. Andrew Jackson, the man who blew up Negro Fort, the man who illegally went into Florida and killed men, women, and children because he did not want any place where escaped slaves could go to and threaten good white people. We remember him for the Indian Removal Act, but what we don't like to remember him for is that he didn't trust Indians because he thought that they enabled slaves. We don't talk about how he took 2 Indian children and one mysteriously wound up dead to be raised by his wife as if they were props or dolls. We don't talk about that. And he took indigenous land so that slavery could grow for the safety of whites. And though we don't talk about Martin Van Buren, it came after him because he's one of the worst presidents we've ever had because he did nothing. He basically just upheld every policy. Or John Tyler, who allowed for the Mexican War to happen because he wanted the annexation of Texas so that it could become a huge slave state. James K. Polk expanded slavery. Did not try to stop it, even though there were abolitionists, there were people who were saying we shouldn't be doing this. Millard Fillmore, another bottom of our presidential list. When the Fugitive Slave Act that allowed people from the South to come up to the North and take blacks who they said were their slaves back down to the South, he did nothing to stop that. He did nothing to rail against it. As a matter of fact, he supported it. You say, well, historically, these are the presidents. This is the policy. This is the policy of the United States. Here's the horrible thing about the Fugitive Slave Act. There were many people, blacks, who were freed because their parents or grandparents had fought in a Revolutionary War. You know, the war that had these great men establish themselves, right? They had fought to allow America to be free. And because of that, they were promised freedom and they were given freedom and they had freedom papers. But the Fugitive Slave Act removed their ability to protect themselves. And many of them had to go to Canada because what wound up happening is they were rolling in and taking people who had been freed for 50 to 60 years after the Revolutionary War, tearing up their papers and not caring and putting them into perpetual slavery, even though they had fought to free the country. Franklin Pierce, the drunk who decided, I'm not going to do anything. And so the Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed territories to decide whether they were going to be a slave state or not. And what did that lead to? That led to things like John Brown, that going into bloody Kansas and cutting people up. That led to border wars that were the precursor to the Civil War. This was all because of presidential policy. Policy. James Buchanan. James Buchanan used to be at the very bottom of the worst presidents simply because he did nothing. But he is important because from 1857 to 1861, he supported the Dred Scott case. You know, the Supreme Court decision that white men could deny rights to black people. They didn't have to respect any rights for them, free or not. Presidential policy. What you vote in is important. Now let's get to Abraham Lincoln. Everybody says that Lincoln is, well, you can't say that he failed, but he did. Lincoln said that it didn't matter to him initially. He wouldn't free the slaves if it meant that he could bring the Union back together, because that's all he cared about. It wasn't until he understood, probably because personal loss of his family and kids dying and how many people had died and were killed, that he realized this is a war of slavery. And rather this nation or any nation can exist. So when you look at Lincoln, let's not just assume that Lincoln was so innocent. Lincoln had his issues too. And he died for it. He died for it. Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's vice president, who basically destroyed Reconstruction, who decided that it was not in the interest of the country that we should have civil rights legislation. He allowed apprenticeship programs and forgiveness programs of ex-Confederates. He was the president that allowed black codes to happen in the South, that allowed black people, black men, to be locked up and then used as because they were fugitives as slaves again. Ulysses S. Grant. I have to be honest about Grant. Grant was voted in from black votes. He's one of the few presidents of the United States who was voted in overwhelmingly due to the support of former slaves, of freemen who were given the vote. And he thanked them. And he even took action to send federal troops down to the South and wage martial law against the original KKK and wiped them out. They wiped out the original Klan. But as time went on, and as he made money, and as he got ill, and as things happened in his personal life, his support of it kind of went away. And when he was no longer in office, the Compromise of 1877 happened, and Rutherford B. Hayes became president, and it ended Reconstruction. This was important because this was presidential policy. Rutherford B. Hayes was put into office. There was an agreement made. He would take office if you would remove federal troops from the South. And once those troops were gone, Jim Crow laws came into effect. Racial violence shot up higher in ways that had unseen before. This is what happened. All based on presidential policies with congressional authority and Supreme Court assistance. Post-Reconstruction and the rise of Jim Crow. You can look through this, but let's summarize here. Grover Cleveland was a failure because he didn't care about lynching. He thought it was okay because the Black Sabbath shouldn't be doing anything anyway. And Grover Cleveland was voted in office twice at different times. He was president, then Benjamin Harrison came in. Benjamin Harrison, who said that lynching is wrong, but passed no laws to stop it. And then Grover Cleveland came right back into office. And we knew where he stood. Theodore Roosevelt, because I'm going to skip William McKinley. McKinley was useless, even up to the point in which he was shot and killed, and Roosevelt came into office. His biggest thing was that whites were supreme. Teddy Roosevelt, good president in many ways, horrible individual in other ways. Imperialistic, murderous, turned on his own black troops who had supported him. They invited Booker T. Washington to the White House, and when whites got mad at it, turned on him. Railed to people about how his mother had been a Southern belle and definitely understood how you treated Negroes. Taft, a man who knew the law and later became a member of the Supreme Court, but he appointed judges as president who upheld segregation and then used laws to disenfranchise blacks in the North and the South. Now, I'm going to stop for a moment here because I want to ask you guys a question because it's still interactive. There's 4 of you all here, and I don't want you just thinking I'm talking to you for 2 hours. How much of this, let's stop with Taft, did you already know? How much of this information did you already know that was presented to you? These presidential failures, decade to decade to decade to decade. And the policies of these men that helped to dictate the policies of this country. Be honest, how many of you knew this? Type it in the comments. You watch this later, leave a comment. How many knew this? Because often what I hear from people when I spend time, I've been on an hour now, and I try to make sure we know our history. One of the biggest things that always gets me is when people say, oh, I knew that. And then when we go deeper, I realize, and they realize how much they really didn't know. Of all the men who have held presidential office, every one of them has failed Black people. Yes, even Barack Obama. And it is because policies that have been dictated and shared and gone on through time as rules of law when we stopped at the post-Reconstruction and Jim Crow era, which is one of the most murderous eras in this country. There is a reason why by the 1950s, people had had enough. They had had enough. policy after policy after policy. Murder after murder after murder. I'm assuming that none of y'all knew because nobody commented. It's not for me to sit here and just go over these things as if I'm just bloviating to you to tell you. It's to show you that year, term after term after term after term, it affected us. When you say, I don't care to vote, okay, just know the effects. When you say that presidential policy doesn't affect you, just know historically it has. When Taft put those appointments in, those judges who upheld segregation, and him and Theodore Roosevelt had their battle because Teddy Roosevelt wanted to become president again. Their fight led to the most racist president we've ever had taking office. From 1913 to 1921, that is Woodrow Wilson. And on there, on my timeline, you see resegregation. Now, it wasn't that we weren't segregated, but there were certain parts of the government, certain parts of industry that Black folks could still have jobs. There were Black Navy sailors. There were people who were in government. Small jobs, maybe a mail clerk or whatever. He wiped it out. He watched Birth of a Nation in the White House. He praised it. He celebrated the rise of the Second Klan. In 1919, when people were being murdered in the street all over the country, Woodrow Wilson did nothing. When Blacks had gone over to go fight in World War I, sacrifice body, Woodrow Wilson didn't care. There are so many things wrong with our country right now that were born from the Wilson administration, because he led us into the early 20th century. He led us into these horrendous things where from throughout the entire 1920s and 50s, lynchings, murders, killings at record scale. Warren G. Harding, who met with the NAACP and said he would sign into law the anti-lynching bill and never did, and then he died. Cool Cal Coolidge, who came in and said, hey, you know what? Not my issue. Not my issue. They shouldn't be violent. They shouldn't be evil. They shouldn't be uneducated. So by the time Herbert Hoover came in and the Great Depression happened, you know Hoover, the Hoover Towns and everything, and Hoover who told people, go to your churches, and if you're Black, just go die. Herbert Hoover, who was part of the Lily White movement, who was trying to remove Blacks out of the Republican Party. Then we got Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And people say, well, the New Deal, and even today, people praise Roosevelt. But what they forget is that Roosevelt and in collusion with mayors throughout the country, but most definitely where Theorella LaGuardia of New York sat there and devised a way of what would happen in the 50s when whites were allowed to go into the suburbs and take their post-GI Bill monies and purchase houses and cars, which were also bankrolled by the federal government. And blacks who had served were redlined and told you could only live here in squalor so that you could not grow any wealth. You remember the Ozzie and Harriet TV shows and how they showed those folks living out there in the suburbs, and then they went to jobs and they opened up businesses. It created generational wealth. That was Franklin Delano Roosevelt that did that. But we don't know that. Harry Truman, despite the fact he showed you that he kind of cared about having blacks in the military, he also did racist things because he was a racist that believed in the superiority of white. Good old Dwight D. Eisenhower, good old Ike, who watched kids being hurt trying to go to school in the South, who saw Brown versus the Board of Education and did nothing to make sure that blacks could integrate into the schools. So that as we entered the 60s, we entered this period of time in a firestorm. John F. Kennedy, we praise him, but he did nothing until he was forced to do it. And then he was shot. And then Lyndon Johnson, who signed the Civil Rights Bill, Lyndon Johnson, who said, oh, well, I'm going to do all this stuff for black people until the Vietnam War, where he sent black men at unequal numbers to go die in Vietnam in the draft, who turned on black leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. because they dared say we shouldn't be sending black bodies. That's Lyndon Johnson. I feel like I have to go through this with you all because I'm hearing so many people say it's not important. Richard Nixon was the originator of the war on drugs. That's 1969 to 1974. 1969. And we're still having this problem where they use the war on drugs to lock up, kill, and murder black men and women. Gerald Ford was just a button. But let's look at President Carter. Jimmy Carter tried to come in and do some things for black people. But because of the nature of how he came into office and the nature of how his administration went and the inflation that was involved, he couldn't really do anything. And in many ways, they stopped trying. They took their attentions overseas. Ronald Reagan. Oh, there's many things you could say about Ronald Reagan, but what you will definitely know is that he signed policies to limit the ability of black men to live a fruitful life. He locked up thousands, millions of black men during his administration. Men who some of them are still in jail today. George H.W. Bush, when Rodney King was beat and they wanted a statement about the riots, he blamed the blacks, not the police who inflicted the horror on Rodney King, not the people who got away with that horror. That's what happened. Bill Clinton, let's talk about it today, the 1994 crime bill, the super predator. His acquiescence to Republicans to say, this is not a health crisis, this is just criminals. All of this 20th century mass incarceration happened because Richard Nixon, during his administration, said, let's go to war on drugs. But the truth was, let's go to war against blacks. Let's lock them up. let's kill them. Because if they're criminals, then they're not full citizens and they can be utilized in many different ways. That's starting. It is hard. It's a very hard history to understand. And I'm trying tonight to hit you with the facts so we can make better decisions. We all remember George W. Bush, and his issues with Hurricane Katrina, and the fact of how aid to blacks was slow and almost non-existent. And then the inability to admit that they turned the National Guard against the very people they were supposed to be there to help. We ignore the black people who were shot because the news media told everybody they were looting. We ignore how many people weren't able to get out of their homes, who weren't prioritized to get out of their homes as they flew into predominantly white areas and airlifted them out. There's many things we could say about George W. Bush's administration, but that is a key indication of their failure to respect black lives. Barack Obama came into office with a huge support of African Americans and whites and got into office and said, I'm here for everybody. And the biggest error that Barack Obama made was he said, we're living in a post-racial era. Let's handle everybody equally. But they didn't handle him equally. They stifled his ability to talk about young black kids being killed in the street like a Tamir Rice. They got mad that he sat up there and cried and said that some of these boys could be my son. When he spoke on racial issues, they told him, Mr. President, you shouldn't be talking about that. When he wanted to investigate the malfeasance of police officers throughout the country, they told him, no, you shouldn't be doing that. We're not a racist country anymore. We elected you, sir. And to his own admittance, he sat on it. As things got worse, as the racial divide got more horrible, and then we had Donald Trump, who said, beat him in the head, knock him down, don't be nice to him, who had rallies where black people were attacked. But these policies go all the way back to George Washington, to John Adams, to James Buchanan, to Richard Nixon. There's a reason why I went through this with you all tonight, because I want you to see how policy affects us and can even destroy us. When you go and you look at all of these black people who have been killed as a result of these policies, and yet we don't understand the importance of a vote. We're out here arguing about Kamala Harris's being Indian or black. We're lying to ourselves. If you go back and you look from 1870 to right now, I just showed you the timeline of all of those presidents. But if you were to go back and look at that time to right now, what do you see? You see horror. You see people who don't seem to get it. If we don't vote, if we don't fight, we're going to repeat these horrible situations over and over and over again. You have the right, don't get me twisted tonight, to not vote, to not do anything. But understand that policy can dictate oppression. Policy can dictate oppression. Let's take a look right now, police violence between 1870 to 2024. We saw the post-Reconstruction era, right? We saw the rise of Jim Crow. We saw the lynching thing. I showed you the precedents of how it happened, how laws were put into place. That came from presidential and congressional policy. So that by 1910 to 1950, blacks were leaving the South because that's where they were mostly being killed and oppressed and destroyed. Chart shows you the Scottsboro Boys in 1931. 9 black teenagers riding on a train, right? White women say that they raped them. And you see, when you look at the case, how many lies were put out, how many things were just ignored about the women, because it was easier to allow the policy of the land. And some of those boys was locked up for years. Civil rights movement. We get into Emmett Till. We get into the Birmingham campaign. We get into the idea of Bull Connor. We get into the idea of black girls being blown up in churches. We get into the idea of Medgar, which we talked about earlier. We get it all, Vernon Dahmer, and on and on and on and on. People dying because of policy. And folks understanding we got to vote to remove the policy. But if you don't learn it, you start to repeat it. Rodney King, Amidala, who got shot 41 times simply because he was trying to take his wallet out. These are some of the 2 most famous cases of this post-civil rights era. But there are more than enough. And when we take our eyes off the ball, then we start getting into all of these young men and women. This is nowhere near a full list. Sean Bill, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, on and on and on and on. And we don't seem to understand that we cannot change it if we allow things to happen like Project 2025 that we talked about earlier. If we ignore the presidential malfeasance, if we ignore that our votes, our interests, what we do every day affects what is going to happen. In the modern era, we are seeing these young people die almost every week. And some we know about and many we don't. We just had a woman who simply said, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus, and shot in the head. Every Thursday, I get on and I sit here and I look at our history, and I tell people I look at history in a way of how we keep going backwards. How we keep going backwards. How many civil rights acts do we need? Because we don't grow our own politicians. We don't grow our leaders. We do a really good job of growing rappers, musicians, sports figures, and we need those. But we do a horrible job at teaching civil rights, teaching civics, and encouraging people to go into the law, encouraging people to go run for office, people who have a moral compass. We do a horrible job of that. And we keep going down the same road over and over again. Eric was talking to me last week about grassroots organizations that we can vote people in, but it's gotten to such a point that we ain't grown none of these people. So most people don't know them. We have to do better. I say it every Thursday. I say it almost all the time to my kids. It's a reason. It's a reason. Gosh, sorry. Yeah, it's a lot of it has, because we don't cover the things that we should. We don't talk about the things that we should. We don't teach civics. We don't teach knowledge. We don't teach people. Even in our schools, we follow a Prussian way of teaching that allows them to feel patriotic and disenfranchised. And it's horrible, because the failure affects all of us. I was sitting here yesterday watching one of the presidential candidates, and I wanted to talk about this. Talk about how a person is not Black. And it blew me away. If you got my book, yes, shameless plug. If you're one of the people who got my book, right? In this book, there's a part in here where I try to explain to you through a question the migration of man, right? I tried to talk about how man migrated. And in particular, one of the things that I talked about was a gene marker, M130. Now, everybody's not a geneticist. Everybody don't have a scientific background in genes. So I understand how it's not common knowledge. But one of the things I wanted to quickly touch on tonight is that gene M130. While we got people on television saying that somebody's not Black, right? Saying how somebody is not a part of the Black culture. I always thought she was Indian. Well, M130 is a marker that we can trace. And I talked to you in my book, Get the Book, about how we can trace genes now, Y chromosomes, things like that, and how we can go in and follow migration patterns. Well, one of the things that we discovered is we identified the Y chromosome marker, right? And we see the migration out of Africa. Early human movement, 50,000 BCE. And we start to see the path through the Arabian Peninsula. We start to see how they route through. And historians, geneticists, people look at this. And this is how we know that that marker came out of Africa, Black, and went into Asia. We see the establishment of the Indian subcontinent. Wait a minute, what did we just say here? India. We see the coexistence of this genetic marker with people that were already there. We see it as it goes into South Asia. How it developed those civilizations. This whole chart, right, that I put together just goes to show you how that one M130 marker, because we know that Kamala Harris is Jamaican, so we know she has an African side there. But the fact that there are people who don't know that Indian people are African blows my mind. When this is something that we know, and there's not one geneticist, there's not one person that I've seen get on television, maybe they feel they don't have to, who's gotten on and said, wait a minute, hold on, man, we could track this marker all the way across from Africa into India, into Asia, into Australia, in the Aboriginal Australians, you know, the ones that they say really are white. And then we found out that that was a lie. How do we know this? We know this because we study the genetic markers. Ladies and gentlemen, if you one of those people out there that saying Kamala Harris is not black, then let me when I share this online later on tonight, get on there and go look up genetic marker M130. Know what it is. Know who you are. And then if you're confused, if you're really, really confused still, go on Amazon, go to Lulu Books, and get 101 Black History Question Challenge written by Eddie K. Phillips, Early World, before 1619. Know who you are. And let me tell you something. This is a robust book, right? It ain't small. You gonna learn. There is no excuse for what we do. None whatsoever. The last thing I want to cover tonight, I know this was a long session, and I appreciate the 4 people who have been with me throughout this and whole time. And I hope any of you who watch later, share the program. Share the program. Because I'm telling you, that if we don't start to really share this information and grow our understanding, God did not put us here to be stupid or foolish. We got to do a better job at that. The last thing I wanted to cover tonight is really based on a peeve of mine. It's a peeve of mine. People often tell me when I teach history or when I writing, but they often tell me, well, Eddie, you know, I do my research. And I go, okay, how do you research? Now, some people are honest and they'll tell you, man, I don't even know how to start. I was on a program with Mike and Phil a couple of weeks ago, maybe like a month or 2 ago. And one of the gentlemen said, hey, man, what do you do to do research? And I advocated to him. I said, hey, go get this book. It's more editions out. It's called The Modern Researcher. It's in colleges, right? It talks about research and how you do research and how you do writing. It's a great book on research, but it ain't the only thing on research. But it'll give you a start. If you're one of those people who want to learn something, but you don't know how to approach the learning, you might want to stay tuned to this last part before I leave tonight. Because I want you to understand what real research is. Right? And so we're gonna look at this. Conducting comprehensive Black history research and the systematic approach. This is my approach. This is how I go about it. If you ever ask yourself, how do I go about identifying a topic, figuring out if it's factual, this is how I do it. And I ask you to give me the next 10 minutes or so that you can learn how to do it too. It's not hard. The first thing you need to do is identify what it is you're going to be researching. What is it that you want to know? Do you want to know about the People's Grocery in Memphis? You want to know, well, how did that happen? Maybe you want to know about Ida B. Wells, right? Maybe you picked up Ida B. Wells's collected works and you said, man, I want to know who she was because I read something about this thing that happened in Tennessee at the People's Grocery, and I know she was involved. So then what you do is you clearly define what it is that you want to know. You form a question. Who was Ida B. Wells? Right? So it's very simple. Now you go get her collected works. You go get sources that show you who she is, preferably something that is from her own words that she wrote herself. Right? It doesn't have to be a real big reading. You don't have to read a book that's 400 pages. It could be a simple, small book that someone wrote or took some of her writings. It could be a speech. It could be one of her things from her diary. It doesn't matter. It could just be something that gives you an identifier of who she is, and what she did. Now, I want to go further, right? This is when you start trying to figure out. This is any research, writing, history, science, whatever. You refine what it is that I know a little bit. See, a lot of us stop with the little bit and we don't go further. That is why in my book, when I wrote my book, I went about and I made sure that in my book, in this book, right, you see it, but here, right here, when you look in this book, you will see that I put a lot of work, probably more work than most will, into sources. Because I wanted you to know who was the source of the question. Where do I get my information from? And for all of the book, all of the sources that are here, look at this, all of those sources in here, page after page after page, because you have to look at what you're doing and refocus your attention and say, okay, now I got the general understanding, right? I got the general understanding. Now I want to know, how did she affect the whole? Then you start looking at, this is what we talk about, the scope and the scale. What geographic area did she affect? What people did she affect? Who did she influence? Who influenced her? Did she speak overseas? Were there people, which she did? I'm just using Ida as an example. It could be anything, but that's how you do your research. And that's only the second step. Now I'm going deeper. Now, literature review. Now I want to find out who is for and contrary. Who lied? What was the pseudo? Who gave theory that wasn't based on truth? Who was biased? Right? Then I want to create a bibliography, an annotated bibliography, which is what that is that you just saw in my book. And I want to start listing some of these people who supported, who didn't support. Where is this from? Is it a valid theory? Is it a valid fact? Was this something made up? Who are the scholars in the field? That's how you do research. You try to figure it out. I don't care if you're doing it in the Bible, looking at biblical study. Anything you do can't always be agreeable only to you. Some books are rancid. But the fact is, I've read them and I've gone through them so that I understand why this person was wrong. When Charles Carroll wrote The Negro, a Beast or in the Image of God, that's a horrible book. But he did it from a biblical mentality. He chose Bible verses and he tried to validate himself with science. How do I counter that argument if I haven't read what his argument is? If I haven't defined and picked out the books and the things that I need to be able to decipher and break down what's going on. Sometimes that may mean for a historian going back and reading ancient texts from 2,000, 3,000 years ago translated. But see, that goes into the fourth step, right? That's when you start to identify, because see, now I got everybody's theory. Who are the primary sources? Original documents, original words, original artifacts that come from the actual person, oral histories. Who are those? Where I get those from? The slave narratives, actual letters. Then I start to go, there are libraries online throughout the world. Then I start to get into those archives and libraries. There's something that's called the Internet Archive that you can go pull up right now and go pull up books for free to run against your investigation and say, well, wait a minute, that wasn't written by her. You use your sources. You locate those primary and secondary sources. And you try to figure out, paint the picture fully for and against, so that you know when you talk to others, what is the argument going to be? This is even when you're researching presidential candidates, congressional candidates, policies. Where did they come from? Why were they put into place? That's still not the end of research. Now you contextualize your sources. What does that mean? Understand what the context is, what the nuances are. Why did they do that back then? Why were they lynching? What was their racist, xenophobic mentality back then? Why did Ida B. Wells decide to write it down? Oh, because there was an increase in lynching. That's what the red record was for. Now, you start looking for bias. That's the critical evaluation. Was Ida biased in what she was saying? Can I go look at sources other than Ida B. Wells and find that William Johns was actually burned to death? Oh, well, there are newspaper articles. There are things that were said about him. Yes, she wasn't biased. She wrote it as it was. And you extract that information to show the other person's bias. Someone said recently that Dr. King was a heretic. This is all out here a couple of months ago. He didn't believe in the resurrection of Christ. But I have a book of all Dr. King's letters and works, not just his early coming through school works. So I extract the information from his speeches, from his letters, from the things that he wrote as he lived his life, so that I can go against or for what he really thought. That's how you do it. Don't just tell me you went to Google and I did research. That's not research. And even after you analyze the primary sources, you're still not done. You have to constantly engage. You have to constantly look digging deeper and deeper. I tell people, if you start on one little thread and you keep pulling until that whole shirt or sweater is pulled apart, that's research. This is what it's made of. You have to grow it. You have to shrink it, grow it again. When I wrote my book, this is what I did. So then when you synthesize, what is synthesis? That means now I'm going to take both the ideas that were against and for. If you read my book, you will find several times I will give you what someone said that was against, and then I will give you the fact that validates what it really was about. This is research. Develop your argument. Develop your thesis so that you now can be able to present it, to argue it, to show evidence of whatever it is that you're saying. So you're not a Umar Johnson sitting on someone's broadcast just spouting nonsense. And when people say, well, where you get that from? People always ask me, Eddie, you always got a book. You always got some, because I've developed what I'm saying based on primary fact information, not made up from me, and I took it through this entire process. All that has to happen before you ever document it, before you ever put it out there. And then if you're writing a book or you're writing something or you're doing a study, there is also my wife talks about this, the peer-reviewed process. If you're wrong, go back and revise. If you find that you have done something in this whole process that's wrong, go back and do it again till you get it right, until it's factual. We shouldn't be jumping all the way from back here when we identify a topic and we jump all the way to publish and share. That's what happens on Facebook. That's what happens on social media. Yep. I saw that this was something and I didn't do any of these steps. I just decided, let me put it out here, even though it may be wrong. We got to do better with research. We got to do better with research. That was my last topic that I wanted to go over for the night. I did this 2 hours. I won't do 2 hours very often, but I did this 2 hours today because every now and again I got to teach. A lot of times I get on, I do an hour and I cover something. I'm not saying I'm not teaching during those hours, but what I will say to you is that a lot of times I get on, I ask you all's questions and I present you with history and I enjoy that. But then there are times like tonight where we got to go over these subjects in depthly. We have to really, and I can't do it within an hour. So every now and again, I have decided, right, so that I can get here with you and teach at a level where you can hopefully gain something from it, that you can grow your knowledge and understanding, which is what erudition is supposed to be about. That is what God laid on me to do: grow knowledge and understanding. Teach that which has not been taught and that which has been hidden. And I go out of my way to do that. And sometimes it drains me. I apologize these last 5 minutes to many because I got online, maybe I think it was last week, and I was just so burned out. I finished the print version of this book. I had already put out the interactive version for people to learn from. And I'm working on the second one. And I said, God, it takes a lot. I just read you through the research process. I said, Father, it takes a lot to write these books, to know that what you're writing is factual and not just something that you're just throwing out there because people don't know this information. And a lot of times people also don't know the cost. And I'm not just talking about the physical or mental cost. People don't want you teaching Black history. It affects things in your life because there are people that say, oh, I saw you online. Or those who won't say they saw you, but they got something against you because you're teaching history, because you're teaching something that they don't know. I have friends and colleagues and associates who are PhD in history or school teachers, and for years, right, they would tell me, well, Eddie, this is this and that. And I'd be like, yeah, that's what you have learned from orthodox conditioned history. But many of us don't know Black history. And we don't even know where to go read it, or how to attain it, or how to validate it. And so when you do that, when I do that consistently, people get mad. People have argued me down when the fact is right there in front of them. And they've had an ought against me. Oh, I've had people block me on Facebook. I've had people who will never invite me to do a show that they do or a program that they do during Black History Month or anytime. And I had to understand, because I'm human, and it weighed on me. And then this week, I saw two people, Pastor Razor and Tony Briscoe, who got online and sent me a picture saying that they had gotten my print book. And I think they both also had bought the digital book. And that made my heart feel good. Because sometimes you feel like you're teaching into the void. And I don't mind doing it. I told God last week, Father, I will do it. But I am human. And I asked people to pray for me. And I want to say, I say all this because I thank everyone who prayed for me and my mental health as I do this. Oh, Pastor, and I know you got the digital. And I appreciate you. I really, really do appreciate you. It is a lot to do. And I sometimes you just go through it. But I thank God, because when I got my book, my print book, I had done the digital book. But when I got this print book and I picked it up and I said, man, this may sound crazy to y'all. I said, this is pretty heavy. Right? And I was like, this is, and then something said to me, look here, goofball. This is 288 pages. This is study. This is God allowing you to know this stuff. I see you on it, cuz. This is a blessing. And I tonight is a blessing to be able to share with you what I share with you tonight. And for you all, you say, hey, no, goofy. Well, that's not in our blood to be goofy. I just thank God because this has really been a blessing for me. And sometimes you got to reevaluate. So I'm working on a new book. I'm doing some new steps toward what we're doing with Erudition. This is one you all will see, and I'm gonna say this because I'm getting to my 2-hour mark. We're gonna put out a summary of every episode now with kind of what you saw with the summarized maps that I used tonight. And what it will do is it will show you what it is we're talking about in the episode. And so you can kind of already have an idea of where we're going to be going and what we're going to be covering. Even with my sons, who sometimes sound like they talking complete lunacy, they do have a method to their madness, and it showcases when you start to map out the ideas that they're sharing. But I really thank all of you all for staying with me over these 2 hours. We won't do this all the time, but I wanted to do it today. Share, and I pray that you got something from it and that you've grown from it tonight. And I'm sure we'll hear from others. Go out there. Pastor Sargent, he said he got the digital. The digital book is on, both are on Amazon. You can get the digital for $18. That digital book you can get there. You can also buy it on Lulu Books as an ebook, and that is your book once you buy it as a digital, and that can be used on your phone, your laptops, or whatever. You can also buy. You said make the outline available at a cost. I should, but I always try. It's the crazy part. This book, when I did this book, I went out of my way to try to do this book as cost effectively as possible. My wife was like, "What?" I was like, "I'm trying to keep the color costs down, the pages down." I went through how I'm going to do this book so that even though it was $40 this is $40 print, that it was at least going to be worth it. And it wasn't about necessarily the profit that I was going to get, but just the idea of the information going out. And I know everybody doesn't agree with that, but the fact is the information got to go out there, and we got to get better and smarter. So go out there, get those books. The second one is coming. I'm doing a book right now on the Middle Ages, talking about Christianity, Islam, the Crusades, what Africa was going through during the time of the Middle Ages, when Europe was in the Dark Ages and they really didn't know what to do, and how Africans influenced European and African and Eastern life. So all of this is before 1619, because I don't believe that we should start our history at slavery. We should show how God has blessed the Black people, the Black culture, the African culture, and how that diaspora has spread all over the world and influenced every part of this world. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get off of here. Thank you again. I'm going to go eat something, and I got to go to lay down. I got to go to work tonight, but I wanted to spend this time with you all and do these 2 hours so that we can, Teddy going to be mad at me. If you are looking to support the Erudition Network, this is our ticker. We have a Cash App. It's $, the Erudition Network. You can do that to help out with the Erudition Network. But also, anytime you buy any of our books, that money's from those books go to help with the network also. So we appreciate all of your support. But I'm going to get out of here. Thank you again. Thank you. I can't thank you all enough. I really went through some stuff last week emotionally, and I just thank everybody for the prayers. It was greatly received and very much appreciated. But I'm going to get out of here. God willing, we'll see you all again next Thursday. Remember, Tina is on Mondays. I think it's 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, 8 o'clock Central Standard Time. The boys are on at 5 if they get on, because sometimes they're doing other things. But they're on at 5 on Wednesdays, Mountain Standard Time, 6 o'clock Central Standard Time, I believe. And I'm on Thursdays. All right, I'm going to get out of here. You all be blessed. See you all next week, hopefully. And y'all have a really good and blessed rest of your week. See you then.